We're going to start the Horry County Solid Waste Authority Workshop Wednesday, June the 20th, 2018 at 1 o'clock. Mr. Bo Ives will do the invocation, and Mr. Michael Hughes will do the Pledge of Allegiance.
If you bow your heads, please. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all your gifts. We thank you for this fine county. Please grant us wisdom as we hear this presentation today, and may all the deliberations be to your benefit, to the benefit of all the residents of our county. In these names, in your name we pray. Amen. Amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And we need an approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? The ayes have it. What we're going to be talking about today is the capital improvement projects discussion. And as we all know here, some of our mission, or what our mission is to work within the parameter of our properties and to utilize that to the best of our abilities to make sure that Horry County has solid waste properties to use for quite some time. So we're going to be talking about that today. Mr. Knight, was there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, let me add to that. We do everything that we can possibly do to save landfill space, extend the time that it will close out. A few months back, we challenged our engineering staff to look at all of our properties and see if there's anything that we could do on the property that could extend the life of the landfill. And it looks like a lot of information. I think once we walk through it, you'll understand the charts, and it looks like a lot of money at one time, but I think what we get in the end is very, very cost effective, and it's somewhat thinking outside the box, but I think it's doable, and we want this to be really a question answer discussion. If you got a question, ask them. Want you to understand the whole process when we finish up, and we will turn it over to Vance and Jan with the financials. But it looks like a good program. So, Vance, we ready to go?
Okay, appreciate it, Mr. Knight. Got a short presentation to go over some of the concepts, so you'll have a visual of what we're talking about, and then we'll get into the cost of them. I thought it'd help if you understood what these numbers, where they're coming from. So the first thing I would like to show you, this is a aerial of the Solid Waste Authority's landfills, and I'd like to go take a minute to explain it. And I'll see if you, can you see the red dot up here fine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so I'll use that instead of a laser pointer then. But so just to get you familiar with the layout of the site, this area right here is a closed Class 3, which Class 3 means municipal solid waste landfill. So this is a Class 3, meaning it's a lined landfill. And then we have this area here outlined in yellow. I'm trying my best right here. That is a Class 3 area that has been constructed and is currently under operation, which means it is receiving waste today. And so I'm calling that the active area. This red area outlined up here is a Phase 2 piggyback area, that is an area that DHEC has already given permission to construct, but we have not yet constructed it and therefore haven't started operation, but it's within your discretion of when you want to construct it. There's no more approvals required to do that. Just for reference, this area out here, this is an area that was an unlined municipal solid waste landfill that, starting around 2000, we vertically expanded with Class 2 or C and D waste, went to its ultimate capacity, and it has now also been closed with a cover system. So this area is not projected to have any more waste in it. This area up in here, this is also currently an unlined municipal landfill originally that is now currently being vertically expanded with Class 2 or C and D waste. So that, you can see this operation here, that's where the current C and D operations are, and they are allowed per the permit to come across this area. So all of this will have additional C and D put onto this area before it will be piggybacked on top of it with a synthetic liner and then continue to be expanded. And down at the bottom of the slide, what I've got is the timelines that each of these classes of waste streams are permitted for currently at the site. So the first one that you see is Class 2 permitted. Again, this is where this operation is ongoing, and we're permitted for capacity that is estimated to last until early 2023. The Phase 1 piggyback, which this is the latest area right here that was constructed, when this whole area outlined in yellow, when it would reach capacity, is projected to be sometime early 2029, at which time you would initiate operation in the Phase 2 piggyback. And the Phase 2 piggyback is estimated to go starting 2029 up to about mid-2040. So that is the status of what we have right now as far as what's been approved and permitted by DHEC.
So no capacity for Class 2 beyond 2023 currently?
That's correct. And so what we have is got about 1 million cubic yards of Class 2 capacity currently, and that's the time frame that it would last until 2023 as it stands. There's about 4.1 million cubic yards of Class 3 airspace in the current constructed piggyback one, and about 4.8 million cubic yards additional when you build your expansion. So the way you'd look at this is, you know, we're going to talk about capital improvements in a minute. If you're projecting your landfill, the Phase 1, to run out of capacity in 2029, when do you build Phase 2 so you're not right up against the edge and getting yourself in a bind of nowhere to go? So we would typically say 2 to 3 years before running out of the capacity, you would build that Phase 2 piggyback such that it was ready to accept the waste in time before you ran out of capacity. So what we're looking for is capacity beyond this timeline. You may recall you're currently going through a solid waste management plan update, and one of the directives of that plan is to provide 20 years of disposal capacity for the waste streams that you're managing. So right at this point, we barely meet that criteria today for the Class 3 waste, and we don't meet that criteria for Class 2 waste. So one of the options are for where do you find additional capacity? And one of the things you have to consider are wetlands and their associated buffers. That is considered a constraint, and I'll get into that a little bit. These borrow pits and what kind of operations will you be able to conduct it? And I need to explain that a little more in future slides. And then what kind of capacity will result from either one of those. So there's two main areas that we saw as options for maximizing this current facility. So I'll start with the designation of, we call this the Phase 4 piggyback area. So you'll see this area that I'm sort of outlining here, which would be along the western side of your properties. Just to orient you again, this area here is the landfill gas skid, and all this hatched area in here, in this yellow area here, this is a wetland that is currently in a conservation easement, as well as upland buffers around those wetlands, which are also in a conservation easement. So well, that's phase 4. Phase 3 is following along here, and it would tie right up to the outside edge of the currently permitted phase 2 piggyback and go across the current access road and over and above these large borrow pits that are here. There are no wetland impacts that are required for that one. So let's just talk about phase 4 for a minute. So what we had to do is evaluate, was there one that provided an advantage over the other? So let's talk about phase 4. Again, the phase 4 piggyback, it's about a 44-acre area that would be available if you expanded in that area. About 20 acres of it would be consist of a wetland. So you'd have a 20-acre wetland impact required for this. And current regulations, when I'm talking about this, wetland regulations, they will require all reasonable alternatives to be exhausted before pursuing an impact. So one of the issues with this is that if we were going to request an approval to permit this, one of the demonstrations we would go through is say, is there any practical alternative on this site that you could pursue before you went into this area? And I'll give you a little bit of background that it was, if I recall correctly, in the 2008, 2009 timeframe, this was explored. As a matter of fact, Joe Floyd and myself went down to the OCRM and Corps of Engineer offices in Charleston and met with them. And that's when it was emphasized to us at that time that you're going to have to demonstrate practical alternatives. And they specifically pointed to this area where the bar pits are, is demonstrate that you can't do that. You will have to demonstrate to our satisfaction that that can't be done before we'll consider a wetland impact. So it appears to us that phase 3 is going to either have to be demonstrated to be impractical or before we can proceed to phase 4. There's one other challenge with phase 4 that I would point out also, and you've got to have a little bit of a history to fully appreciate this. But in 1998, I'll use my 1998, the original Subtitle D landfill was a square area basically where I'm showing you here. It was a 27-acre landfill right here. And it was put here really without a long-term plan for how you would go beyond that facility. There were some challenges that were out in here there were peat deposits and so forth. This wetland had already been established. So when they laid it out, they laid the bottoms out. So you have a base liner system that's collecting leachate off the bottom of it, and you're directing this leachate to pumps, or what we call sumps, such that leachate can be pumped to your leachate facilities. So this one had sumps in all four corners. It had a sump here, had a sump about right here, had a sump down in this area, and had a sump here. Envision, if you will, if you did this phase 4 piggyback and you're stacking, the further in you go, the higher up your waste is. And we estimate that if you filled this up with a piggyback, your waste depth in this area would be about 300 feet above. And you've got a pump at the bottom of that. They'll have to be accessed, maintained, and so forth. So it's a challenge to do a vertical expansion over that current sump situation. We are looking at alternatives now that will allow you to basically move this sump. And what that would involve is It's already has waste in here, but it would be some option where you would remove the waste, dig it back, maybe with some kind of a trench box reinforcement that allow you to get to the base of the landfill where the bottom is. While it's still active, so there's leachate still trying to come there, it's the low area, so you'd have to do some kind of a system down there to temporarily keep that leachate off of you while you breach the liner and put a drain basically from where it is outside of the area to what you would ultimately want to expand to. So you move the sump by gravity from this location to another location, and then your pump would eventually be outside of the fill area. It's a technical challenge to do that, but I wouldn't say it's something that couldn't be overcome. With enough money and time, I'm sure you can overcome anything you want to. But we're trying to see what it would take. Not sure we have identified yet what that options would be, but I'm saying that's something that we are looking into. So let's move on to phase 3. So if we were to do phase 3.
Excuse me just a minute. Can I ask you one question?
Yes,
If you'll
ma'am.
go back to
Yes,
the
ma'am. Go ahead.
thing you had. It looks like we're cutting the wetlands in half,
This,
right there, right.
if we did this, we would impact all of this wetland in here, if we did it.
Okay, and to the left of that line, is that wetlands as well?
That would stay wetlands. That-
Okay,
The way you would look at it is, this would basically be the outside of all the grading activities.
okay,
Anything on that line and to the right would be considered impacted.
okay.
Anything on that line and to the left would not be impacted.
Be impacted. Would it be, how much more difficult would it be to stop that in the wetlands from going on into the other than it would be just normally? Would that not be more expensive as well on that side?
All right.
And I don't know how wet the land is, so,
Well, there's wet and then there's wetland.
right.
And I'm speaking more from the core challenges as far as impacting a wetland. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow what you were asking me to clarify about. Do you need a pointer? Would that help if you?
no, it's
See
that
that?
white line where you're
Right there.
cutting the
Yes.
wetlands in half. And my question might be a hard one because I don't know how wet that is. Because sometimes you can stop and start, and depending on where that is, you go straight through, might be very difficult in those areas, more
Well,
so than normal.
There may be some challenges to develop this because
Okay.
it is a wet area and
Is the holding water wet? No,
There's a major,
or just like a,
Wayne, you might want to speak up, but there's a
Argue with it.
major drainage area that goes behind the shop. Point to where the shop is. That's the shop. There's a
Okay.
major ditch that goes behind the shop that's
right in here kind of.
20 feet deep and comes on out here to Sterrett Swamp. But there's kind of a drainage basin through there. It's not like Sterrett Swamp. by no
Okay, so
means.
that was, I guess, what I
No,
wanted to
it-
know was how bad that was going to be to actually work with. If it's just wetlands, but it's dry a lot of the time, it wouldn't be
Yeah,
as
no.
bad as it would be if it was a swamp.
But it'll be an issue if you're impairing the wetland you're not intending to touch. They could look at it as an impairment even though because of the proximity. And that's going to be one of their issues, impairment.
Yeah, there will be some challenges there, just like building anything in Horry County, you're gonna touch some of this stuff, but, there's areas in Horry County that's been treated, an area like this has been treated favorable, the hospital up on number 9, Seacoast. It was in an area. The football stadium, it was in an area. It was kind of released, so,
well, like Vance said, if you got enough money, they'll let you fill it in and move forward.
But there are
But-
conditions of soil and there are conditions of what plant material are there, not just of whether it's wet.
yeah. But,
It's a number of criteria they use to evaluate.
but like Van says, piggyback 3 is the one that we're gonna look at first. If the board likes it and thinks we should move on. So I think 3 is where we'll, and most of this stuff,
Especially
on
since
three.
they told us we need to prove that it's not a course that we can take before we even look at it.
In phase 3, though, right.
So we showed two options, 3 and 4, and we're saying that at this time, if we were to proceed with just one of them, we would proceed with 3, go down this evaluation that we're doing, and decide if it's, if it meets the reasonable criteria. And I'm not saying not do 4, but you may not do 4 at this time until you have exhausted 3, and then say, once 3 is exhausted, then consider 4.
But could you permit them both at the same time? Even though you would do 3 first?
I don't know if I can answer that question. We are investigating that option. And I think that some of how hard we want to pursue both at the same time is how confident we would be on being able to solve the sump issue in addition to it, because the sump issue, we're working on how much of an effort that is. And
What's the point of no return on the sump issue? What point is it impossible to
Well,
address it?
I wouldn't say I'm prepared to answer that question, but obviously there is a cost at which this is not the most reasonable cost. And maybe after we go through some of these today, we'll have a more, I guess, feel for how far we're willing to chase that down the road. So I think what I'm trying to say is phase 4 is still on the table, but I think we need to exhaust all other options first and then pursue phase 4, if that makes sense.
And that's what you've been told, yeah. right.
Yes,
Yeah, because unless I'm misunderstanding, I thought you were told that phase 4 would only be an option if we could not find some other spot on site that we could use.
That is
that not
correct.
right? So it would not be feasible to try to do phase 4 and phase 3 at the same time from a permit, because if we're saying that we're doing phase 4, that means we've found some other place that we could use rather than phase 4. Is that not right?
I think that what they would like us to demonstrate is that all other options have been exhausted
Okay.
prior to the actual impact taking place on the phase 4.
And I guess my question on phase 4, and it kind of goes back to what Pam was saying, from an ecosystem, how do you draw a line here in wetlands and not impact the one on the other side? I mean, what kind of costs and what kind of dollars and money would you have to spend to make sure that on the left-hand side of this line, that it's not impacted?
Well, I think that what would happen when we went into the future, I'm using the white line to be simple,
Okay,
but what would have to happen is that you would have an impact and a buffer. And you would have to, the buffer area that you would say was probably originally wetlands, but they're gonna say, not only did you impact up to here, but you influenced up to here. So you have to permit all this area to an area that they say is not impacted by your activity. So if just for simplicity, if I said the area inside the white line was 20 acres, they may come back and say, we want a 200-foot strip also that we're gonna call impacted. So let's make it 22 acres of impact to make sure the rest of it is not impacted by your activity. That makes sense. Okay. So now we've talked about phase 4, going back to phase 3 to give you an idea of the concept and to make you hopefully have a feel for what the development would look like. So I understand that this looks like a plate of spaghetti, but there's some method to the madness so you understand some of the things about that. If you look at the area in here that I'm outlining here, that is basically the area that you are permitted today to go and fill. And what you'll see is this is where the high area, the highest part of the landfill would be, is right here where my pointer is. Everything from this point over What I'm showing is that's the bottom of your phase 3 expansion if we were to do it. And this, from this point over, that's the top of what you could fill it to by your permit. So that's, only thing I'm trying to show you there. And then if we go one more slide, that would be the top of everything put together. So what's happened is the highest area is still here. We didn't really change the highest area. We made it a little bit longer, but we didn't go any higher. And so you're getting all this capacity, and the visual that I'd like you to get on the piggyback, why piggybacks are cost effective is because you build an area, and instead of having 4 slopes coming up like a pyramid, you really only have 2 with the rest of it laying over previously constructed area. So it becomes very effective as far as how much capacity you get for the acres that you build. So this would be the top of a completed, assuming phase 3 was proceeded with. Now, a lot of people have talked about, hey, this is a big borrow pit, we're gonna have issues with that. And I'm gonna try to take a minute to address that. So what I've put together is just a conceptual slide so you can get a feel for scale if nothing else. So what this represents is this is the area that has been dug out and would have to be backfilled in order to start the development of the landfill. So there's a lot of things that would happen there. Right now, it's a hole in the ground that's being pumped. So the groundwater around this facility has been artificially lowered. If you stop pumping and you backfill it, that groundwater is going to recover. It's going to come back up. Now, we are confident that we have an abundance of data that we know what the groundwater has been around this area. We know what the elevations were before it was dug out. You can look at areas around it, and it's not that hard to say. We can anticipate, once backfilled, groundwater is going to come back to what it is around the rest of the site. Okay? Number 2, when you backfill this, it's going to be what you'd call a structural or engineered backfill, where you know the type of dirt that's going in, you know how it's placed, you know how it's compacted, and so you've got a very good understanding of what your subgrade and its ability to handle the landfill is. It's actually, I'm much more confident with this situation than if it was naturally occurring and I went out and did drill borings and we had samples this big around every acre or so, and you're making assumptions of what's going on in between it. This is a much more understood scenario, much more, well,
Control.
yeah, control is a way of putting it. So the concept would be this. We would backfill the hole, the groundwater would recover, and then we would have separation from the groundwater and the liner systems as required by DHEC regulations. Now what you see is 2 types of waste. There's a class 2 and a class 3. What we're saying is this right here would be the base liner for the class 3. This is where the synthetic liner would be. This right here, once you got above the natural ground, could be filled with class 2 material and still meet groundwater separation requirements. So we can use class 3 material as a portion of the backfill to build the subgrade for the class 3 landfill. And I'll get into that in a little bit.
But not below groundwater.
Not below, no, all waste materials will have to meet a separation per solid waste regulations. So,
Controlled fill is the only option for that fill,
yes, sir, I believe,
because it's going to be supporting the subsequent levels.
yes, sir, and you want to make sure it's stable, doesn't settle, and doesn't slide. And so this gives us a really good starting point if you do an engineered backfill there. So, I'm going to get into, we know that this area right here, to backfill it up in here to this elevation right here, round numbers, I'm not going to try to get too specific, it's about 1 million yards of dirt that has to be put back in there. So we know that's a big number. We know that it's gonna cost a lot of money to put $1 million of dirt in the hole. And I also can appreciate it would not be a good thing to put you at risk to spend that money and then ask DHEC, can I now please build a landfill? And they go, for whatever reason, no. You just spent a lot of money, and DHEC can say no. So what we're trying to sell at this point to DHEC is that we're selling it just like we did, those of you that were familiar with the PEAT project, that's a project we did out here before, is we're selling a demonstration that we know that the groundwater is going to come to somewhere between here and here. We're going to permit it based upon it coming to one of those conditions and provide the separation on that condition, backfill it, and then demonstrate to you that it didn't come any higher than we said. What they would do, what we could do with that is prepare a permit application right now and get a permit from DHEC with that being a condition in the permit, that the groundwater didn't come up higher than you thought it was. We have no incentive to cut that right to the edge. We have incentive to put some contingency into that so we are not getting caught short. So that's the way that application will be put in. But what that allows you to do is have a permit or approval before you incur the capital required, the substantial capital required to go forth. So what we're trying to do is minimize, if not eliminate, the risk. So that would be the concept. All right. So same kind of timeline, just updating it. If you decided to do the phase 3 piggyback, it changes two things. As I said before, class 2, we could use class 2 material for some of the backfill to build class 3. And based upon what we've done before, that would give you capacity through 2032 of class 2 material. So you're adding almost 10 years of capacity. This would be the proposed class 3 additional capacity for the piggyback 3. So it would take you from 2040 out to 2050. So you're adding about 10 more years of capacity in association with this piggyback 3. So now, one of the things, where's all this dirt and what's the plan to get it here? And I think it's important to understand that before we start talking about the numbers. This is the A2 Buste, what some people know as the 1187 property. And just to orient where we are, the current landfill's over here. This is the common boundary between the existing landfill facility and A2 Buste, and this is where Sterrett Swamp is. So the concept would be to build a bridge from the current facility across Sterrett Swamp and across the wetlands onto the A2 Buste property. There's a road network that would have to go in and out through the existing wetlands and go to different areas that would be large contiguous borrow areas. We've identified them, borrow area 1, you see 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's no order to, number 1's the only one we're going to do, or the first one. It's just so you can get a feel for how much dirt is potentially in each of these. So what we're doing, we're making assumptions on these projections on this right here on how big, we know the area, how deep would we be able to go and how many yards of material would come out of there potentially. So as you can see, number 1 is about a 10-acre area, and we think you can get somewhere in the vicinity of 270,000 cubic yards. That's assuming that all the material is usable for the purposes here of structural backfill. Now, if, just talking here, if that was a potential area, I wouldn't use this first. I would have let the landfill operators have access to this close dirt. And if I was going to develop something and have a contractor or something move 1 million yards in the next year or two, I would go to one of these outside areas here and put that in reserve for the operations long-term, like daily cover and such.
What alternate access is there to this site?
Highway 90, yes.
And where's the closest point to Highway 90?
Highway 90 is, this is getting up close to where the MRF is. The MRF would be, if I could just, for visual purposes, the MRF would be about here, and then you come up here to Highway 90, and then come back around like that to come to the landfill.
That direction.
So one of the concepts here of why we would like to use this is, anybody who's been here during the construction project and you're trying to bring dirt in on dump trucks, the volume of trucks, the impact to Highway 90, number one, you have a lot of issues with that every time we have a project with the traffic. Number two is, if you keep it off of Highway 90, you can use off-road trucks. Off-road trucks haul more material per trip and don't have the weight limit issues. And so it's a more cost-effective way to move the material. So we feel like there's some advantages to being able to use your property for this soil versus,
Fuel too?
you're saying on-road fuel versus off-road? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
How big a
doesn't,
big,
doesn't a mining permit come into play there also if you put it on Highway 90?
Yes, sir.
And we don't have to have a mining permit if we build a bridge on that property.
Yes, sir.
So
That's
this
correct.
is the same program we looked at 10, 12 years ago.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It is exactly the same. So what would have to happen on here is, to go through here, you'll see some areas that there's some circles. I know it's small, but each one of these is where the road has to cross and potentially impact a wetland to do a crossing. So we're snaking this around to demonstrate, to get to the areas we need. This is the most practical, least impactful way to get to each of the bar areas. And so we've been working with Brigman with regards to what's the layout, and that's why these roads are doing all kinds of turns and such, is to avoid wetlands to the most practical amount. So
What is the wetland impact?
this, right now, there's 6 crossings and 2 isolated, which is, right now, we're in less than 2 acres.
Less than 2 acres.
Yes, sir. So that's where we are now. I would like to caveat that is preliminary from the standpoint of what are these crossings going to look like. And so I don't want anybody to hang their hat on any of that until I think that Brigman is waiting for us to say, yes, this is a good idea, now we'll take it forward from the standpoint of we'll keep looking at it more. But I've had enough input from Brigman to know that do the best you can to avoid wetlands at all costs.
They know this area.
Yes, sir. So my point on all of this is, there's more than enough dirt here if our assumptions are correct on how deep you can dig here and get the material. So what we're currently getting ready to start is go put some borings in each of these red areas to say, is the dirt that we think is there really there? Because I'd hate to go and spend money to build a bridge and go out there and say, well, there's no dirt here. So we do have borings that were done back in the 2000 timeframe, because back in that timeframe, this was originally proposed to be the C&D landfill, and there was some investigation that was done out here. So we have some boring data, and the borings were not put in here to really identify the dirt, but as a byproduct, we sort of got some of the information. So we're doing some confirmation, and we're doing some new investigation by doing the boring plan on all these bar areas. So if you got back here and found out that there was not adequate dirt or adequate quality, we'd have to back up and punt. But that's one of the things we're trying to do, is verify our assumptions that that material would be here. But we do think between all the areas that have been identified here, there will be adequate material to do the project that I'm explaining to you.
Will there be a benefit to that area beyond the excavation, besides the ultimate disposal of waste material from the storms?
Well, what I would assume And again, I'm going off what people have told me, but my direction is that this area, especially number 4, that's a large, contiguous, large area that's been designated as storm debris management. We certainly would want that to be the last option to go into and not go into it at all unless we absolutely had to. So we would like to exhaust, these up here before we even started down here. That'd be an example.
But if, once each of those pits, assumingly were utilized, what value would exist on this site
On the site,
for the Solid Waste Authority?
well, until you think about this is still a fairly large area that we're not showing as a bar area. And even if you started here, we would say start in this way and work your way back, and you have use in it until you do dig it out. But we're still saying this area here could be used for
Still
storm
be
debris.
utilized. We're
Yes.
not removing all the potential sites where we could put the storm.
Need to put your microphone closer to you, and we need to remember to bring these closer to us when we ask questions.
And I would point out, as I recall, up on, and I don't have the whole site here, obviously, but up in this part where the MRF, let's just say the MRF is there is a large area here that's also still available for storm debris.
I'm just looking at these areas here that you're pointing out. I don't want to utilize these and then diminish the capacity of the area for what it's currently intended for. It's just, I'm asking, then, just to know.
Yes, sir.
How deep are you anticipating the ponds to be, to get those volumes that you have up there?
25 feet deep. Now, and think about the bar pits that I'm showing you that are out here, they're twice that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, on all this, I'm hoping I'm underselling and over-delivering. When I say this, when we go do the borings, I may feel more comfortable to say they're going 40 feet. But I'm trying to not oversell it at this point, based on what we know.
Yeah, because you might get in to your first borrow pit and decide you want to go a lot deeper. Save you space elsewhere. Instead of going 25, go 40, or go 50 to match what we already got.
If I know the operators around here, if they squeeze every drop of they can get out of it.
Yeah.
And I would expect them to do the same here. And if we were able to get more out of these areas than I'm projecting, you certainly wouldn't need to go to as many areas.
Correct.
So,
And then we have the wholesale rate of what it would cost to buy engineered material to compare with the cost of pursuing this avenue.
yes, sir.
Because there would be a diminishing point where it might cost too much. We should just buy our soil on the open market.
So what we've got is a history of what that has cost us over a number of projects. And the hard thing about dirt is what is the availability in the future when you're going to need it with land development going on and other projects? The material's becoming more and more scarce. It's coming from further and further away. So relying on the open market is you're gambling to some degree on that it will be available. So if you do have this at least in your back pocket now, there's things that we have done in the past, is we would say we have a need for X yards of dirt. Give us a price for bringing your dirt and give us a price for using our dirt, and the difference is what they value or what we value our dirt as.
Right.
And we decide whether or not we want to proceed with preserve our dirt versus using off-site dirt.
And also preserving potential burial sites
Sure.
in the future.
So with all that, I think it comes down to the big question, funding. And so I know a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of numbers, and what I'd like to do is maybe go through and just walk through some of the logic, and it may make some of this, all these numbers start to make a little more sense. So the first thing that I would like to show you, you've got a 8.5 by 11. Why is that not showing up?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, sir.
While we're changing topics?
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break.